The story of North Korean troops deployed to fight for Russia in Ukraine just keeps getting stranger. Are these elite troops not really what was promised? And why is Russia trying so hard to conceal this open secret? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is the first story coming to us from the Wall Street Journal, where they say North Korea is sending young, inexperienced, and malnourished soldiers to Russia to test ground in Ukraine as cannon fodder. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, what? This story barely even makes sense. And here's the overall thing, right? They report that the soldiers sent to fight in Ukraine are predominantly young conscripts in their teens and early 20s. You might recall that in North Korea, conscription starts at 17 years old. This is as opposed to seasoned veterans. Now it says they're not used to fighting on flat terrain and have weak physically weak from widespread malnourishment in North Korea. Now, this is the South Koreans are the ones characterizing them as cannon fodder mercenaries. Those other intelligence assessments have said these are special forces whose training is primarily focused on operating in the Korean mountains. But here's the thing, guys. There's a lot of hand-wringing here, and this sounds like the word I'm really looking for is cope. And here's why. Is because everything they are describing is exactly what was promised by North Korea. And here's the thing. You have to place these things in a North Korean context. First off, the experience they're trying to accrue, Russia is probably transparent. It is not a secret that casualty rates are very high among Russian rank-and-file troops. So North Korea is unlikely to send some of their, they use the word experienced troops, but the reality is that these elite formations are going to be made up of young and in-shape troops, at least in shape by North Korean standards, right? While malnourishment is pervasive, you have to understand the system they're being brought into. And that system is one that has been built by the Russians over the course of this war, which is designed to take men, the average age of which is now 50, oftentimes with chronic health conditions like hepatitis or alcoholism, and get them trained enough to fight in Ukraine as these high casualty assault units. And in this regard, these North Korean troops are way above expectations because here's the thing. We see sort of a similar occurrence with many of the troops from the Foreign Legion, right? Ukrainian troops fighting in a very different war from Iraq and Afghanistan, where many of these troops have gained their initial combat experience. And yet, their experience carries tremendous weight. Why? Because while each war is unique, there are basic skills which are essential to warfighting, right? That is operating your individual weapon. That is taking orders and following a chain of command. That is communicating in a fast-breaking environment, right? These are things that are pretty fundamental. And these are things that, again, the Russian military is used to taking literal drunks off the street or out of a prison and turning them into soldiers that can fight. So how much easier is it going to be for Russia if you say, listen, someone else already trained these guys to load their weapon and engage targets? Russia's going to say, great, you've saved us 3 days. Then they say, oh, they also have basic first aid training. Now you're saving them another day and a half of training. So then what's left? Well, you have to just give these soldiers a relatively straightforward, unique experiences where you say, hey, listen, here's how you dig a trench. Stupid easy. Here's how you operate a radio, right? Stupid easy. This is more about refining, right? This is how the U.S. Army, of course, did its deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, where soldiers would undergo their basic training, right? Their individual training, and then they would be assigned to their unit. That unit would receive deployment orders, and then they would enter a training cycle in which they would train together in combat tasks, usually those that are very specific to the mission they were likely to be deployed to perform, right? And so the fact that you go, oh, these North Korean troops are ill-prepared, and it's like, well, yeah, sort of, but in that sense, no one is actually prepared for this, right? The other thing that I think is interesting is that they say, oh, they're young men in their 20s and 30s. There's more to think about here. And that is that for Korea, or for Kim Jong-un, the valuable experience being accrued is going to be in the leadership, in his officers, right? His officers are the ones he wants to gather this combat experience, learn how to turn conscripts into a force capable of fighting and winning against Western-backed equipment and militaries, right? That is the skill. And that is not a skill that the individual soldier has, the average Korean soldier, right? That is a skill that the officer class has, right? The political class. But the individual soldiers, their skills consists of using their individual weapons, using a radio, and dying when ordered. And so that, I think, is the thing to take away from here, is they go, oh, well, where are North Korea's experienced troops? But we're placing a Western lens onto this thinking that says that, again, for us, we say, oh, you're a 27-year-old corporal. You're really valuable to the military. Not the case here, right? A Soviet-style military has a huge band of zero skills, zero leadership soldiers, and they have a smattering of officers, and those officers perform almost all active decision-making. So again, think about this as the soldiers are more like tools that the officers will use to accrue combat experience. And that is why I think, well, we're going to talk about why I think this is the case here in a minute and why there's more evidence for this kind of officer-centric deployment. But first, if you feel like you need a little bit of a bonus to get things done, you don't need to bring in some malnourished Koreans. You might just need a little extra caffeine. That's right, Strike Gum. We have all the caffeine of an energy drink in each piece, zero sugar, made in the USA, veteran-owned. Go to strikegum.com and get it. Get after it, right? Leave energy drinks behind. It's 2024, guys. Listen, it's not 2006, right? We're not listening to emo music and listening to music on our iPads or our iPods with our headphones in, right? We moved on. There's better alternatives, and Strike Gum is the better alternative. No sugar, right? You chew it, you pop it, you go. No expensive energy drink. Doesn't taste like cough medicine. And best of all, we're the highest rated energy gum on Amazon. There's a reason. So check it out. Link is in the description. Okay. So here's what I think is interesting. So you can see Russia is transporting North Korean troops to the front lines in civilian trucks, according to military intelligence. This is likely to avoid, again, them getting interdicted by Ukrainian missiles. Right? But I think this is probably the conditions that North Koreans are being transported in, North Korean enlisted troops, so to speak, line soldiers, right? But what I found more interesting is that another group of North Koreans, boarded a Russian Air Force jet, stopping in North Korea and then making a beeline for Ukraine. Now, this is really interesting because why would one of the most impoverished countries in the world, who could they be loading into a Russian aircraft, into a Russian jet like this, an IL-62? Okay, it's an Air Force passenger jet, and yet, so somebody's important enough, and those somebodies look like hundreds of people. Why are they doing this, right? Why are they making this flight to Ukraine, right? It showed that it took off from Vladivostok, headed to the North Korean coast, then took off from the East Coast, presumably one of their only international airports, headed for Vladivostok a couple hours later, and then went a few hours across Russia into Ukraine. Here it is. Here it is landing on an open field east of Saratov in Ukraine. This is really interesting for a bunch of reasons, right? Let's see if we can find where Saratov is on the combat map. And I think this will tell us something even more insightful about North Korean activities, right? So let's see. Saratov, a city in Russia. Here we go. So let's take a look. So here's this city in Russia. All right, we'll zoom it out a little bit. So what's it doing in Saratov? Well, here's Kharkiv. So what it seems to me, right? And so here's kind of the Ukrainian, here's Kharkiv. So this is where the Russians tried to do their Kharkiv incursion, and the Kursk invasion is likely somewhere in this region here. So if you were going to stay outside of the range of Ukrainian air defenses, this is probably where you'd want to land. This also would make it somewhat tougher to track because, again, once the plane is landed, moving in this area in civilian vehicles will be very hard to pinpoint your location. But this is exactly what you would do if you were bringing in commanders. Why? Because likely part of this deal was that first, Russian commanders will likely be operating at every single level, right? Because the Russians need to get the North Koreans into combat, right? And likely they want to make sure the North Koreans get do it right as quickly as possible. But these North Korean officers are likely going to be side by side with their Russian counterparts. And they are going to begin to learn the process, the way of war in this modern Russian context. Now, while the individual soldiers are likely young conscripts, and part of young conscripts' advantage is that they are more ideological, they may also be more leverageable, we'll say. Again, they have families back home, whereas if you're a North Korean man who's at the end of his conscription, right? You're 29. Your parents may not be alive. You may not have siblings, so deserting looks like a better option. Whereas if you're 17, even if you deserted, some terrible stuff would happen to your mom. So you have these young loyal soldiers, and then Kim likely sent his most loyal officers in this flight, and then they are going to be deployed near this front line where they're going to learn just what it takes to fight in the Russian way of war. And that, I think, is the story here of, again, the last sort of piece falling into place. And again, the fear is that this Russian way of war is going to be something that the North Koreans are going to adopt wholesale, right? You're going to see, as this war ends, you're going to see them restructure their military to reflect this kind of all these Russian lessons learned. And again, I think you're also going to see the Russian interface with command to start occurring higher and higher. So at first, every officer is Russian. Then you'll have North Korean platoon leaders or company commanders operating at kind of that tactical level, taking orders from Russians. Then you'll see North Korean battalion and brigade command. And then eventually, I think what you're going to see, what Kim Jong-un likely is demanding, that North Koreans operate pervasively across Russian operations. That'll include air assets, air defenders, drone pilots, everything that the Russians are using to fight, a whole brigade. From soup to nuts, the North Koreans are going to be doing independently. I think that's the end state that Kim Jong-un wants, because he wants these combat-tested brigades. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Huge thank you to the Colonel tier members like James Sterling, Steve Moran, Doug Beck, Alan Knudsen, Bastian Himmerling, Brian Kelly, Dale McCombs, James Ola, and Henry Roussier, as well as all of our Lieutenant tier members. I couldn't do this without you guys. I appreciate you all so much, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.